العوافي يا جماعة and welcome to another episode of تعا اتمشى مع براين. اليوم صراحة الطقس هون بأستراليا كان خرافي. 37 degrees, hot, and right now I'm walking and it's starting to cool down. And that's also one of the nice things about Australia is that unlike Lebanon, in the afternoon, even in the hot summer days, it usually cools down and becomes quite pleasant. So I think I'm currently at that turning point, which means we'll have a great walk and a great conversation for today. واليوم موضوع الحلقة حيكون مدينتي المفضلة يلي هي طرابلس or Tripoli. And I think the main reason I got inspired to talk about Tripoli today is that, and some of you might have seen in the news recently, that a building collapsed in Tripoli the past week and killed 15 innocent people in the process. And it's also something that's not the first time that it's happened. It's happened before as well. There was another building that collapsed a while back in Tripoli as well, which led to the death of 2 people. That's besides the injuries. And I think it warranted, or هي ألهمتني هذا الموضوع أو عطتني الفكرة لحتى أحكي عن طرابلس، ووجه الضوء على طرابلس وورجي العالم شو هي طرابلس لإلي وشو هي طرابلس للبنان، لأنه هي عن جد جوهر كبير للبنان طرابلس. وكمان بحب أشكر 2 of my dear friends. أولهم هي رفيقتي نادين غماشي، والتانية هي رفيقتي سام بارودي, who both also kind of gave me the idea or inspired me in some way or another to talk about something like this or to talk about Tripoli. So again, thank you guys for your support and for the help that you constantly provide. But to go back to the topic at hand, طرابلس أو بالأحلى مثل ما كانوا يسموها الفيحاء. The reason why كانوا يسموا طرابلس الفيحاء، وهيدي جدي كان يخبرني إياها لما كنت صغير، إنه لأنه كنت قبل ما توصل على طرابلس كنت تشم ريحة الليمون، لأنه كانت طرابلس من زمان مليانة، ولسه لهلا إذا بتقطع بقلب طرابلس بتلاقي محلات في شجر ليمون مزروعين، ليمون وأفندي هيدي كانت الوحي من وراء التسمية أو تسميتها الفيحاء، لأنه كانت تشم ريحة الليمون قبل ما توصل على طرابلس، ومن وقتها سموها الفيحاء. It was such an important aspect of Tripoli and attribute. يعني قد ما كانت مهمة، في مدرسة بطرابلس اسمها روضة الفيحاء. هل قد كان هذا الشيء بيرمز لطرابلس، كون أنه هي كانت عطرة وريحة الليمون كان ينشم من وين ما كنت تكون، يعني أو أول ما كنت تكون فايت عليها. And for those of you who don't know, Tripoli is the second biggest city in Lebanon. It's the capital of the north of Lebanon. It's gone throughout history in many titles، منهم الفيحاء، منهم دار العلم إلى آخره. بس طرابلس مثل كثير من المناطق اللبنانية اللي موجودة، it has its turbulent history and عندها قصة حلوة ببشاعتها مثل ما بيقولوا، إنه because of the tragedy that befell Tripoli, it makes it for me more significant and also gives me more reason to highlight this beautiful city that I called home for a big period of my life. And to start, I think the first thing before actually talking about what Tripoli means to me, Tripoli itself is a historic city that has lived through that has actually started or initiated with the Phoenicians. It lived through Persian rule, it lived through Hellenistic rule, it lived through Roman rule, and so many other periods of history. And there's evidence of that in Tripoli even today. And we'll start chronologically about some of the biggest landmarks that are in Tripoli, وهن يعتبروا من المناطق السياحية بطرابلس. ففينا نبلش أول شيء in terms of the periods. One of the biggest evidence of the Crusader period هي قلعة طرابلس, or the citadel of Tripoli, which is sitting high on top of a mountain overlooking the whole city. It sits next to Nahar Bu Ali, which is kind of why it was situated there. It's a big castle, ancient, and I still remember when we were kids, we used to go there for school trips. And one of the most astounding things there, that we'd walk around the castle and you'd see the old-fashioned cannons. But also, one of the things that I used to love about it is that in one of the walls, while you're going in, there's still a metal sphere which were fired from the cannons stuck in the wall. And I think it sustained that hit during the multiple sieges that happened, and it was kept there. And it's truly a beautiful, beautiful place. But also, even after the Crusader, we have remnants of the Mamluk period which are very prominent in Tripoli. For example, the biggest one would be Jami' al-Mansuri al-Kabir, or the Grand Mansouri Mosque, which is situated in the heart of Tripoli. And it offers respite and a break لكل اللي بيكونوا قاعدين بطرابلس, لأنه طرابلس اللي بيعرفها هي مدينة عجقة وعالم it's very close knit together. And then in the center and in the middle of all of that chaos, there's this grand mosque with the gardens around it, and it offers this kind of escape from the city itself, marking it as one of the important sites in Tripoli. But other than the mosque, there's المدرسة القرطاوية يلي هي كمان كانت during the Mamluk period. And it was the start during that period, and the initiation of this school was the start of the thriving of education and knowledge in Tripoli. And that's why at some points in its history, Tripoli was referred to as a very cultural and intellectual city itself. There's also Hammam Azz al-Din al-Bek. And for those of you who don't know what a hammam is, the hammams used to be public showers. But they weren't just, it wasn't just a shower, it was a place for people to come to have saunas, to wash, and to sit and spend time with one another. And if none of you have experienced this, I would highly recommend that if one day you are in Tripoli, go down and experience one of those hammams, because it truly is a wonderful experience to go in and to they even have services in there where they like batter you with olive branches and stuff like this, because it's like a form of massage therapy. But it's something that's very ancient and rooted in the history of Tripoli. And even beyond that, during that Mamluk period, We also had the creation of خان الخياطين وخان العسكر وسوق طرابلس القديم كله بلشت أساساته من وقتها فترة المملوكية بقى وهول الأسواق بس يعني you have to if you're in Lebanon you have to go see them because they're beautiful. They're tightly knit alleyways with shops and stores in each corner. Each alleyway is dedicated to its craft, which is why عندك خان الخياطين, which was the alleyway where you'd go to get your clothes and all your fabrics and linens, or خان العسكر, or سوق الذهب او سوق العطارين او خان الصابون. يعني كل هو كانوا alleyways that were dedicated to special crafts, and those were initiated in that period. But also, like, this was the Mamluk period, and then after that came the Ottoman period, and there's remnants of that Ottoman period and that Ottoman rule over Tripoli as well, which was the first was Khan al-Sabun. So Khan al-Sabun was actually an addition later on to the أسواق يلي هي جوا, واجت وقتها العثمانية ووقتها الأوتومان امباير كانت بلبنان. وكمان في عندك الحمام الجديد اللي هو also another حمام that was built during that period. And you can see that there's archaeological evidence of the period or the periods that Tripoli went through during history. And I think that just shows the grandeur and the importance. دي كانت طرابلس محور, مش انه منطقة, بل هي كانت محور من لبنان ومن منطقة من الشرق الأوسط كله. واكيد نحن عم نحكي عن طرابلس هون, نحن عم نحكي عن قلب طرابلس جوا, بس ما فينا نحن نحكي عن طرابلس من دون ما انا اذكر المينا يلي هي بعد اقدم من طرابلس. لانه المينا, historians say that the origins of that coastal port of Tripoli was the starting point of what is known today as Tripoli, because there is evidence there that it dates back to the Phoenicians, and it makes sense that there were people that were looking for a way to sustain themselves, and they found a coastal area where they could go fish, where they can sail. And we all know the Phoenicians were people that used to travel and sail and explore the world, and what better way to do that than to be on a coastal city, and that's Elmina. And Elmina was one of the parts of Tripoli that survived all of the historical periods that Tripoli went through. For there are parts in the city inside that were built during the Mamluk era, that were destroyed later on in the Ottoman era. And even it was so important, and the port of Elmina, or the port of Tripoli, was so important that during the Ottoman Empire, before there was a dissection and before Sykes-Picot decided which country is which, it was named Marfa' Halab, the port of Aleppo, because they used to use that port to sustain and sustain commerce and to do trade all the way into Syria from Tripoli. So the boats used to come there, offload, and then they used to also outsource everything from there. But also one of the nicer things about Elmina is that maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes by sea straight forward, you'd start running into جزيرة النخيل, أو مثل ما بيسموها تحت بطرابلس جزيرة الأرانب, which is one island that's part of a series of islands. So you have the big one, which is جزيرة النخيل أو جزيرة الأرانب, وعندك جزيرة رمكين وجزيرة السناني. هو ثلاثتهم تصنفوا من الأونسكو إنه هن محميات بيئية. وانا كذا مره لما كنت بلبنان نازل وكنت انزل مع رفقاتي, we'd take a boat and we'd go spend the day on one of those islands. And I'm not joking when I say you'd feel like you're in Hawaii. Golden sands, beautiful, crystal clear blue water. You'd see sea turtles that were going by. It was just so beautiful. And I love the fact that it was designated as a natural reserve ومحمية بيئية ودلت مثل ما هي. وما وصل عليها الفساد الفساد السياسي والفساد اللبناني اللي عنا ببلادنا، بل دلت مثل ما هي بريئة ونظيفة وحلوة وبهيك بالمي. It's a must visit and I must go to, and also a very very beautiful part of Tripoli. And lastly, one of the also important things about the city of Tripoli, and something that also is kind of a starting point for any civilization, is نهر بو علي. So نهر بو علي هو actually ببلش أو like it feeds من يلا نسينا listen. Oh, 1 second. من وادي أوديشا صحيح. So الفكرة انه هيدا الوادي اللي هو بينبع من جمال لبنان كله بيضله نازل all the way بيصب بالاخر بطرابلس. And because of that river, settlements started on the side of that river. And then they grew up into cities. And then later on, unfortunately, that river that was there was man altered. They built concrete channels to funnel all the water, and eventually that caused the water to reduce. And also the neglect and everything that happened, and people throwing garbage in there, it just turned into a swamp or sort of like a disgusting little ساقي. بس هو نهر بو علي هو جزء كبير وجزء مهم كتير من طرابلس من وانا بعتقد انه هذا مشروع لازم يرجع يتجدد، لازم يرجع اعادة اعاشة هذا النهر، وخاصة بدخلته او بطلعته من طرابلس على المي على البحر، لانه it was so vital for the survival of Tripoli and for how Tripoli was. But even throughout all of this history, Tripoli still grew and still had way more, because during the 1950s and the 1970s, Tripoli went through what was considered its golden age, or what was called the golden age of Tripoli. It was a bubbling, bustling metropolitan city filled with restaurants, hotels, intellectual cafes. And I remember those cafes were so prominent and so important that even when I was a kid, I remember my dad's uncle, his name is Atif Atiyi, and he's a doctor in sociology. And he used to go after work and spend his time in an ahwe with other people, and it wasn't just sitting there and drinking coffee. It was a gathering of intellectuals discussing politics, discussing sociology, discussing subjects of the world. So it wasn't just a place for you a place for you to come and drink coffee, but it was more of a gathering of minds from all sorts to come and discuss and to communicate with one another. And it was just a beautiful period to live in Tripoli during that era between the 1950s and the 1970s. But also, one of the most important things that happened during that era in Tripoli is back then TVs were not common yet. They weren't as widespread and as available as they are today. And so that opened up the opportunity for something better to happen in Tripoli. And that's when the cinema scene erupted in Tripoli. You had cinemas that people would rush to watch movies, because that's the only way that they could watch movies. And you had cinemas like the Rivoli, or Cinema Ampere, or Empire Theaters, or Cinema Roxy. هو كانوا they were staples in Tripoli during that period. And my dad used to tell me that when he was a kid, they used to go down to Tripoli and go to one of these movies and sit there and watch a movie because they had no access to a TV. They couldn't, this was something new. So their first exposure to motion picture was through this cinematography boom that happened in Tripoli during that period. And it was just that Tripoli was growing, it was blossoming, and it was turning into a very lively city. And it used to be filled with businesses of all kinds because a lot of my family's relatives used to work in Tripolis as barbers, as electricians, as mechanics, as whatever it is, because that's Tripoli was the place to be. And one of the important landmarks in Tripoli today was actually initiated and built during that period. And that landmark هو معرض رشيد كرامي أو معرض طرابلس الدولي. So if you've listened in on the podcast before, you would know that معرض رشيد كرامي was designed by one of the most famous architects in the world, a Brazilian architect by the name of Oscar Niemeyer. And it's a landmark project, not just for Lebanon, but for the entire Middle East. But unfortunately, the reason why that project was never finished وما إسا لهلا مهمول ومنه مكمل ومنه مخلص وهو نفس السبب اللي أدى لتدهور طرابلس هي الحرب الأهلية. وأنا برجع هلا بصوت الضوء وبرجع بذكر قديه نحن لازم نرجع على تاريخنا وقديه نحن لازم عن جد نقرا عن الحرب الأهلية، لأنه نحن كتب المدارس تبعنا ما بيخبرونا عن الحرب الأهلية تبعنا وقديه هي دمرت بلبنان وقصات دمار موجود لليوم. And I think it's the reason why those, or if not directly, but maybe indirectly, it's the reason why these buildings collapsed in the first place in Tripoli. It's because of this civil war. Because the civil war was basically the biggest setback in Lebanese history, but also the biggest setback in the history of Tripoli. That bustling, booming city all of a sudden became a ghost town filled with people with weapons and guns and fights and massacres and killings. Mass migration happened. All the people that used to live in the city, in Tripoli city, all started moving out. كتير من العالم طلعوا على الكورة، راحوا على المنيا، طلعوا على الشمال، يعني خلص صارت العالم اول شيء كل هالبزنس وكل هالشغل يلي كان عم بيصير هونيك وكل هالحياة اللي كانت عم تصير هونيك اختفت، لانه كل العالم صارت عم تهرب، بدها تبعد عن المشاكل، بدها تبعد عن الحرب وبدها تبعد عن هيك. بقى سلولي بلش روح طرابلس يلي كان هو الحلو فيها بلش يختفي، لانه هو روحها جاي من شعبها ومن هالعالم يلي كانت تحت تشتغل فيها. But it wasn't just the people that the civil war affected. The civil war that happened in Lebanon also caused irreparable damage to the port of Tripoli, which never got back to that state that it was in. And the trade since then has never gone back to the same state of the trade that it was in before the civil war. And the civil war also allowed for the spread of the political corruption that is in Tripoli and that is in all of Lebanon. Please don't think that for 1 second I consider that the corruption that's in Tripoli is just in Tripoli. I think the birthing of this corruption starts from the corruption found in the entirety of Lebanon. And as it affects Tripoli, it affects all of the other regions. But Tripoli وطرابلس هي الأكلت أكبر ضربة بين كل المدن وكل المناطق اللبنانية اللي عنا. أنا بعتقد من الحرب الأهلية أكبر ضربة وأكثر ضرر صار على طرابلس، لأنه الساعة لهلا امبارحة وقعوا هول البنايات ليه وقعوا؟ لأنه أنا بتذكر لما كنت قاعد بطرابلس ولما كنا عايشين بطرابلس كنت تكون عم بمشي بطرابلس وتشوف البنايات اللي الساعة مخردقة بالضروب You'd walk by these buildings, like, and you can still see the bullet holes where the people used to fight and shoot at one another. And there was buildings that were half damaged and buildings that were affected by blasts and explosions, and they were never repaired. That's the idea, that there was never, after the civil war, there was campaigns to repair parts of Lebanon, for example Beirut or any other city in Lebanon, but that chance was never given to Tripoli. Tripoli was never given the chance to rise again. And instead of investing to fix the old city, what the corrupt government did was that they took all their money and they bulldozed all of those lemon fields that were at the start of Tripoli, the identity of Tripoli. They bulldozed all of that area and they turned it into an area they call today a Dammul Farz, which is new buildings, cafes, and sports centers, and restaurants, and everything like that. And it's all funded by those corrupt politicians who took this money that was meant to rejuvenate Tripoli and bring it back to what it was, and decided to invest in somewhere else and leave Tripoli as it is. And the repercussion of that has been felt after so many years by the collapse of these buildings and the death of these innocent people. And so you see that the Tripoli did not just suffer from that fate of the civil war, but it also fell victim to the corruption of Lebanon and the corruption of the politicians that were there, that decided to take that money and instead of investing it to rejuvenate the city and لحتى نرجع نظبطها للمدينة ونرجع نعيشها، راحوا اخذوا المصريات، شالوا كل الليمونات، محيوهم كلهم. صرت هلا بس توصل على طرابلس ما بقت شم ريحة الليمون. I'm sad that I never got to experience this. Then I'm sad that I had to know اسم الفيحاء من وين جاي من خبريات من بيي او من جدي، بس انا ما صار لي اجي انا اقدر انا احس بهذا الشيء وانا شمها لطرابلس قبل ما اوصل عليها، لانه الفساد موجود والفساد بده يضرب. بقى محيوا كل الليمونات، عمروا بنايات جديدة كلها بنايات سكنية، residential buildings with shop fronts and fancy restaurants and new cars and everything like that. And the true, genuine, beautiful Tripoli and its people were left to rot and decay and have their buildings collapse and have their homes fall on their heads. So that's one of the biggest tragedies that has happened to Tripoli. Not that it experienced the civil war, but that after the civil war, the politicians that ran Tripoli did not want the betterment of the city. They did not want to invest in making the city better. Instead, they chose their own pockets, and instead of making it better, they made it worse. And they invested in this new Dammul Farz area. But on a positive note, and more of looking at the glass half full kind of scenario, I think the fact that these politicians neglected Tripoli is in some way a good thing. Because let's look at Beirut. Let's look at Saht al-Shuhada or Martyrs Square. If you've seen old pictures of how Martyrs Square used to be and how that whole Beirut Souq area, all of that ancient historic part of Beirut, how it used to be. It used to be lively, it used to be filled with people, it used to be buzzing with business and just community. Buses going by, taxis driving by, people at cafes and everything like that. And look at it now. ساحة الشهداء كلها صارت طرقات ما بقى في الدوار الكبير، ما بقى في المحلات اللي كانت تكون حواليها، ما بقى في الشعب، ما بقى في العالم. هلا بتقطع بساحة الشهداء ما بتشوف حدا. The last time I saw a crowd of people بساحة الشهداء كان وقتها الثورة ب 2019. وسوق بيروت القديم اتدمر وتعمر فوق منه شو السوليدار. بس هذا شو؟ هذا محى تاريخ بيروت. هيدي انتو، هذا المشروع يلي العالم تمدح فيه، هذا المشروع اجا شاف تاريخ بيروت كله قدامه وقبعه وكبه على الزبالة. Historic parts of Tripoli, of Beirut, sorry, that have lived through the ages just as the parts of Tripoli have, destroyed and thrown. No one knows. No one knows. Like, we don't know where those remains are. We don't know if they're still here, if they're not destroyed. And so, and that's because politicians, or that's because the corrupt politicians decided to invest in Tripoli, in Beirut, sorry. Meanwhile, in Tripoli, because they decided to neglect it, those ancient elements are still there. السوق القديم بعده هونيك، ساعة التل والماشية اللي تحت منها بعدها هونيك، خان الصابون جوا بعده هونيك. They're in states of disarray of course، وبدن حملات إعادة تأهيل كلهم، بس بعدهم هونيك ما تدمروا. So if there's one thing, and again looking at the glass half full kind of situation, if there's one thing or one good thing that came out of this turbulent history for Tripoli, it's the fact that these old ancient remains are still there. And that means we still have the opportunity and we still can make the change and we can still rejuvenate the city and bring back the history that was there. So there's always a positive, even if it's something that completely changed the trajectory that Tripoli was on. The fact that these bits of history are still there, I think, is a big plus to Tripoli. But hopefully, with time, we will be able to change the government and we will have people that are willing to invest in Tripoli and invest in Lebanon and in the betterment of Lebanon. And that's when we refurbish and we fix up all of old Tripoli and bring it back to its old glory. Because Tripoli, genuinely, and هي أعز مدينة أنا لإلي بلبنان. ومع هذا التاريخ كله and all of this turbulent times that Tripoli has gone through, Tripoli still for me is a very, very special place. You see, because I was born here in Australia, but then around the age of 5 is when we moved to Lebanon. And obviously after living for a short period with my grandparents, the first home we moved to and my first memories in Lebanon were in Tripoli. كانوا بطرابلس. كنا عايشين نحن وقتها بمنطقة بقلب طرابلس جوا اسمها الزاهرية. قاعدين ببناية سكنية كنا, a residential building on the 7th floor. In front of that building, I remember there used to be a street filled with pet stores ومحلات حيوانات وعصافير وسمك. ولأنه كنا نحن قاعدين ببناية سكنية ما كان فينا نجيب كلب أو بسينة، بس كنا نجيب عصافير، كنا نجيب سمك، كنا نروح نطلع على المحلات، كنا بس نكون قاطعين من هونيك. We'd always go and like pet the animals that were there. And even in front of my house, like a block away, there was a very big bakery. كان اسمها البيكري فرن المير. And what I used to love about this bakery is that every morning when we'd wake up to go to school, they would be baking their bread and the smell of the bread would fill the whole street. We'd step out of the building to go to school and you could smell the fresh bread being baked. And it's a memory that's ingrained in my head. and a very beautiful part of Tripoli. You see, when we were living in that منطقة in Zahri, Trablus, we used to go to a school, a very important school, and one of the biggest schools back then in the north of Lebanon, which was called the TES, or the Tripoli Evangelical School. And it was 2 blocks away. So my mom, me and my sister, my sister, my brother and I, she'd get us all ready. We'd go down, hold hand in hand, and walk all the way together across to the school and go finish our studies and then walk all the way back home. And these are very fond memories for me of Tripoli. But I also remember the bustling side of Tripoli. You see, even after all of its turbulent history and everything that happened, Tripoli was still a very busy and a very active city. And one of kind of the main active parts of Tripoli is a street كان اسمه شارع عزمة. وشارع عزمة هو شارع معروف كنت تروح عليه بدك تجيب تياب، بدك تجيب any fashion accessories, look, whatever you wanted in terms of clothing or watches or accessories or perfumes or anything like that. That was the street to go to. Millions, like so many stores that were found there. All you had to do was walk down that street and start looking at the glass and deciding, oh, that looks great. And the people were so welcoming. They're waiting for you outside. تفضل هيدا الطعم، تفضل هون، تفضل هيك، تفضل هيك. والحلو كمان، وهيدي ذاكرة أنا عندي إياها كتير قوية بطرابلس، اللي هي كانت شارع عزمي كان يدل فيه كرايجات كعك. تلاقيه مارق الزلمه كعك، معه كعك، تروح لعنده تقول له خيي انا بدي كعكه، فيك تحط بقلب الكعكه يا سماق او اذا عبالك كمان هيك شوي زياده كعكه بجبنه. بعمل لك الكعكه. كنا نروح كل مره، بتذكر كل مره بدنا نروح على عزمه ترجيها لمام، قال لها بشرفك بليز فينا ناكل كعكه. اذا نكون كنا مناح بيطلع لنا كعكه، اذا ما كنا مناح no way. بس that was the best part. We used to like put up with going for the shopping just because we would get to eat that kaki. And even in that street, or as part of it deeper down, there was the Tripoli City Complex, which was the first mall slash cinema in Tripoli. And even in that mall, there used to be stores in there, stores where you can buy musical equipment, stores where you can buy clothes as well. And like I said, there was a cinema there that we used to, I think in Isma Cine Planet or Planet Cinema, something like that. And we used to go there and watch so many movies. I remember one of my vivid memories of watching a movie there was Nemo. Like that's how much we used to go there and watch movies in there. And even during that period when we were living in Tripoli, my dad was working in Tripoli. So my dad used to work for the Ministry of Health in Lebanon, وزارة الصحة. And كان يشتغل بالوزارة تحت بطرابلس. So our school was there, my father's work was there, and our life was centered around that city. Whatever we needed was found right there. All we had to do was just go find the store that was going to sell it and just buy it. And it was I think, a beautiful period that I experienced in my life, having lived in that city. And even I remember we used to go, for example, if it was a Sunday or like a Saturday evening, Dad would put us all in the car and we drive all the way down to المينا. والمينا كان عندها كورنيش كبير، كل العالم كانت تروح تتمشى على كورنيش المينا. بقى we'd get in the car مع Dad، نوصل على المينا يصف، نروح على بوزة هدلة، نجيب كل واحد قرن بوظة ونبلش نلحس ونتمشى على الكورنيش لحتى ما يعود فينا نمشي. بس ما يعود فينا نمشي يلا قوموا نرجع على البيت. نرجع على البيت وطب على الفرشة من. And they're very, very beautiful memories that I share of this city. And even after a period, my dad's work shifted from Tripoli and we changed school to Balamand, which was in El Kura. And even back when that happened, we moved. We moved from Tripoli and we started living in Kura. But even after we'd moved, every week on Friday, my mom had to go down to Tripoli. كانت تقول له لبيي بدنا ننزل على البلد، ما في مجال، كل جمعة بننزل على البلد، لأنه بدها تنزل تتبضع، كل شيء وات ايفر، كل الأغراض اللي بدها إياهم بتجيبهم من طرابلس، كل شيء يعني. The week, what would happen during the week is whatever she needed, whatever we needed, whether it was clothes fixed, whether it was she needed something for her kitchen, whether it's vegetables, whether it's fruits, whatever it is, she would consolidate all of the things we need. And then on Friday كنت تقول له لبي يلا بدنا ننزل على البلد. تنزل هي الصبح تروح تبرم تجيب كل شيء بدها اياه وترجع تطلع. So even Tripoli was so important and such a staple in our lives that even after we'd moved out, we still needed it to sustain our lives. والجملة اللي كانت تقولها لأمي إنه بدنا ننزل على البلد، خلص يعني هيدي معلقة براسي، نزلت البلد. وأنا السنة لهلا بس كون عم بحكي مع أمي أو مع أهلي و I want to refer إنه أنا بدي أنزل على طرابلس، بقول لهم نازل على البلد. That's how it used to be for us. And I think having or telling you about this or telling you my experience in Tripoli as part of this podcast today would kind of help you understand a bit more about what Tripoli is and how beautiful it was. But also, one of my favorite memories in Tripoli, وهي بعتقد ذكرى حتضلها معي كل حياتي، هي وقت صارت الثورة. So the revolution on the 17th of October in 2019. ولعت أول شيء الثورة بطرابلس، كل العالم بساحة الشهداء و everyone's down there. And then a day or two later بلشت كمان العالم تجتمع بطرابلس، وعالم people everywhere. And then I decided, you know what, I want to go down. I want to go down and I want to be with the people. I want to go down and see what's going on. I want to experience this. And I remember even after when I decided to go, and I'm telling my mom, I was like, Mom, بدي انزل لتحت على ساحة النور. وكانت هي كان وقتها بالثورة يلي صارت بطرابلس صارت بساحة النور, which is kind of the biggest square or the central square. It's a roundabout, the central roundabout of Tripoli, and basically you can consider it as kind of the main entry point into the city. يعني هون بتعتبر حالك بس توصل على ساحة النور انت خلص صرت بطرابلس جوا. بقى عم بقول لها لمام، قلت لها مام بدي انزل على المظاهرة، بدي انزل لتحت على طرابلس. وانتبه يا امي وعالم ومدري ايه وانه توقعوا على حالكم and be careful or whatever it is. And she wasn't concerned because it was Tripoli. She was just concerned because it's chaos. That's what the revolution was. It was everyone everywhere just calling for their rights and asking, or not asking, demanding that the government resign. And so I wasn't worried, but I was anxious. I was like, you know what, maybe I should just be careful when I'm going in there. And I remember I went down with a couple of friends, and I was beyond shocked when I got to the front, or when I saw the crowds, and we were greeted with nothing but joy and celebration and love. No, people from everywhere, all different kinds of people, from various religions, from various areas in Lebanon, all gathered under the same thing, all gathered under the same banner of revolution. And it was a beautiful thing. I saw people hugging each other. I saw people smiling to one another. I saw an old man there that was carried so that he could see. And it changed so much, not of my perception of Tripoli, but so much of other people's perception of Tripoli. And seeing how that revolution that happened in Tripoli was not chaos, and it wasn't havoc, and it wasn't يلا بدنا نخرب وبدنا نكسر وبدنا نضرب، بل هي كانت محبة. عالم عم تطلع على بعضها، من عالم واحد عم بيطلع بواحد قدامه عم بيقول له ليك انت عم بتعاني مثلي؟ ايه تعال اعطيني عبطه وبلش عيط معي، يلا بدنا ننزلهم، بدنا نسقط النظام. ولهلا في بس اذا شي مره نزلتوا على طرابلس او نازلين على طرابلس قبل، بساحه النور في بنايه طويله مهجوره ومنها مخلصه، منهم it's never been completed. And during the revolution, some beautiful people in Tripoli painted a Lebanese flag on it with Thawra written underneath. And I think that is a beautiful part of Tripoli. And that is something that we should also keep to remind us that to remind us of what we can achieve or what we do when we stand together, hand by hand. And it's beautiful. So my experiences in Tripoli started since I was a kid. وأول ذكريات لإلي بلبنان هي بلشت بطرابلس، ودلت معي حتى لما نقلت من طرابلس، وحتى لما صارت الثورة بلبنان يلي أنا بالنسبة لإلي هي أكبر حدث بتاريخ لبنان عامري. أنا بالنسبة لإلي من أهم الأشياء أو من أكبر الحوادث يلي صارت بتاريخ لبنان through my lifetime is الثورة. And to have experienced it in Tripoli is something I am eternally grateful for, and something that I will never forget, because it just showed the beauty of Tripoli. And so just telling you guys about this actually kind of makes me so happy to remember all of this shared history that I have with Tripoli, and why I think Tripoli is truly a forgotten gem of Lebanon. But also beyond my experiences in Tripoli, what I'd like to tell you about is some of the valuable lessons that I learned from the people of Tripoli. And they were never lessons as in someone sat me down and told me to do this, but they were lessons taught to me through actions that people did. And I've got a couple of stories that will kind of elaborate those actions. The first is, you remember how I was telling you earlier that when we were living in Tripoli, we used to go to school. I'd grab my brother and sister's hand and we'd walk. It was 2 blocks away from our house. So we'd walk down and we'd go to the school. And so, being the eldest, the eldest boy, it was I felt like it was my responsibility to keep a lookout and keep my eye on both my brother and sister. And so I always, when we'd go down to the street, I'd always grab their hands tight and make sure to always look across the road and whatever it is. And one time, as we were going to school, I noticed that there was this old man sitting outside of his store. And his store was like directly in front of our house. And every day, when we went down to go to school, he would stare at us. And he would keep staring at us all the way until we got to the school. The school was at the end of the street. So he'd keep staring at us all the way. And then when we'd go back home, as we were going back home, I'd still see that same old man sitting in front of his store, and he would still look at us. And at first I was very worried. I went to my mom and I told her, I was like, Mom, there's an old man down the street here that he keeps looking at us and staring at us, and I'm worried. Maybe he wants to do something, maybe he wants to hurt us. And she's like, no, don't worry. It's okay. So I took my mom's word for it. But my mom wanted to show me better. And so I think a couple of days after I told her this, it was a weekend day, so she wanted to do some shopping. She took me down with her. And before we went into the suit inside, she stopped at that man's store. And I remember he used to sell soap, handmade soap from olive oil. And he looks at me, and I remember my mom didn't say anything. She just went inside and she was picking up some soap to try it out. And then I remember he looks at me and he's like, عافاك انت, like good on you. انا طلعت فيه قلت له ليه؟ قال لي لانه انا بشوفك كيف انت بتضلك لاقط ايد اختك وخيك وماشيين على المدرسه، وانا بقول لامك انه ما تعطلي هم، كل ما يكونوا رايحين على المدرسه وراجعين على البيت انا بخلي عيني عليهم. So basically what I thought was someone that was staring at us with ill intent was actually a stranger that was looking out for me and my siblings. Someone that didn't know me. He didn't know my sister. He didn't know my brother. He didn't even know my mother and father. He knew them as neighbors there, but we weren't close with this person. And yet, every day, without fail, he used to make sure what I thought was him staring at us was actually him making sure that we got safely to school and then safely back home. A complete stranger. And that was the first lesson in kindness, or in Lebanese kindness, that I learned. And it came from Tripoli. And it was beautiful. But also another story on the lessons I learned from Tripoli is also an incident that happened with me and my brother. So underneath our house, or underneath the building that we used to live in Tripoli, there was a lot of carpenters, نجارين موجود everywhere. موجودين وين ما كانوا نجارين هونيك تحت. بقى كنا انا وخيي ننزل مثلا اوقات نكون ناطرين تحت البنايه، ناطرين لداد يطلع بالسياره، او ليجي داد لحتى ياخذنا بالسياره او وات ايفر ات از، او يشوفنا نحن طالعين من المدرسه وات ايفر ات از. كان في نجار تحت. هلا كنا انا بعرفه بس بالشكل، بس انه I've never talked to this person. And so one day me and my brother we went downstairs and we were waiting for my dad to bring the car out of the parking lot. ونحن ناطرين هونيك بيطلع فيه هذا الزلمه بيقول لي تعا. هلا هو قال لي تعا، انا انه فزعت انه لا ما بعرفك انا كيف بدي اجي لعندك. قام قال لي ليك خليك عندك. He goes into his workshop and then he comes out with two pieces of wood that he had shaped, one in the shape of a dagger, هيك خنجر عربي، والتاني كانت سيف. وعطى وحدة لخيي ووحدة لإلي. وقالنا هو كانوا عندي قطعتين خشب وبشوفكم كل الوقت انتوا بتكونوا قاعدين راكدين وعم تلعبوا مع بعضكم، هيدي وحدة لإلك ووحدة لإله. Again, a complete stranger. Someone that I don't know and someone that doesn't know me. Just random acts of beautiful kindness that were expressed by a sense of community. هذا الزلم اجى شافنا نحن ماشيين من هون وقال لك عندي هالقطعتين الخشب بركي بعمل لهم، عامل لي لك شو كانوا حلوين. They were simple, they were nothing, they were just cutouts, but the gesture was so beautiful. And I'm still pretty sure that that dagger and that sword are still somewhere in our house in Lebanon. And شي نهار بدي روح بقبش للاقيهم, because they hold such beautiful memories but also so much value to me, myself. And the like another, and I think this is the last story that I'll say about one of the lessons that I learned there. And this was later on. This was when I'd grown up, when I was in uni. So at that point we weren't even living in Tripoli. I was living in Kura. That's when I started studying architecture in the university. And one of the things about when we were studying architecture is that we had to do a lot of research and a lot of surveys. And where best to do them than in one of the most ancient cities of the world, Tripoli. So I remember one time we had to, it was a sociological kind of survey that we were doing. And it was me, my friend David, and someone else, I forget who it was. And there's a big clock tower in Tripoli, بساحة التل. And underneath it, there's this big garden اللي بيسموها الماشية. So we thought, what better place to find people and to survey and to ask questions than this place, a gathering of sorts. So we go in, we're walking around, people that are busy, that are going to the work, whatever it is, and then I look and I see two old men sitting on a bench. And I go to my friend, look, let's go interview them. Let's go ask them and see how they'll fit into our survey. And so I go up to them and I go, عوافي يا جماعة. بيقولوا لي عوافي. قلت لهم بس نحن تلاميذ جامعة من جامعة البلمنت وجايين لعندكم، عنا هيك مثل احصائيات عم نعملها ودراسة عم نعملها، إذا فينا نسألكم كم سؤال. طبعا أكيد، ولو يا شباب تفضلوا. قلت له شكرا، بس قبل ما كمل جملتي قال لي بس ليك قبل ما تبلش بدي اقول لك شغله وحده. قلت له تفضل. قال لي انا اسمي محمد وهيدا القاعد حدي هو خيي جورج. انا امي مرضعته وهو امه مرضعتني. So to translate, he was saying, my name is Muhammad and this is my brother George. And his mother has breastfed me just like how my mother has breastfed him. And it's not meant to, it could have been exactly literal, but even in a metaphorical sense, what he was basically saying is that this person sitting next to him is genuinely his brother, even though they don't share the same mother. بيرجع بيكمل وبيقول لي وانا وياه ربينا سوا ومنحب بعضنا مثل الاخوه، واذا بتخبر العالم خبريتنا نحن وبيصوروا للعالم يحبوا بعضهم مثل ما انا بحبه لجورج وهو بحبني انا، كل المشاكل الموجوده بلبنان بتختفي. I was dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. هو قال لي هيك انا طلع اشعر بدني, like I had goosebumps. I was looking at this guy going like, his point was not just about the brotherly love that was between him and this person, but he was also expressing and tackling one of the biggest kind of problems that happened in Tripoli, is this religious divide, which this religious divide is not a problem of Tripoli, it's a problem of Lebanon. It's a problem that's driven by corrupt politicians using religion as a way to sway people and to have them antagonize other people. And that happened during the civil war in Lebanon, and it was the main reason for the civil war in Lebanon, and its remnants were in Tripoli and still are today. But this person was sitting there bluntly showing me that before this whole shit happened, we lived with one another and we were one people, and we still are. And it was so profound انه هيدا الزلمه اجى قعد هيك وبطريقه كتير بسيطه، ما قعد يشرح لي ساعات. قال لي انا اسمي محمد وهيدا خيي اسمه جورج وامي مرضعته وهو امه مرضعتني ومثل خيي. And it was so beautiful because I think, having lived in Tripoli and having experienced the multiculturalism that was in Tripoli, because Tripoli had mosques but also had churches. It had St. Nicholas, it had St. George, it has a huge Christian population, which diminished over time, of course, and because of the civil war. But before that, Tripoli was a place of عيش مشترك. ما حدا كان يجي يطلع ويسأل أي شو دينك، لأنه كانت العالم تعيش مع بعضها، إن كنت مسيحي، إن كنت مسلم، إن كنت سني، إن كنت درزي، إن كنت علوي، إلى آخره. And that kind of caps another lesson that I learned from Tripoli. And so from these three stories or these three experiences, I learned the true meaning of Lebanese kindness, the true meaning of communal love, the true meaning of some carpenter who doesn't know me just having leftover wood, and instead of deciding to throw it away, he chose to make two little boys' day by carving out a simple dagger and a sword. What is that if not an act of just utter and complete kindness? And the last is the lesson of how not to see people the way these corrupt politicians want us to see them. Not to label people by their religion, not to label people by who they believe in, but just to appreciate people and to live together as one, like محمد وجورج. بقى هو الدروس لإلي أنا تعلمتهم من طرابلس، وهن من الأسباب الأساسية يلي أنا طرابلس بالنسبة لإلي هي مدينتي المفضلة بلبنان. As evidence to this, ever since I've moved here to Australia, I've gone back to Lebanon twice. The first trip was for 2 weeks. The second trip was for 3 weeks. In both of those times, I dedicated 2 days just for Tripoli. I didn't talk to anyone. I don't want anyone, like, if you want to come, sure, but I don't need anyone to come with me. I would drive my car. كنت صف عند السرايا برا قبل ما توصل على ساحة التل، على ساحة الله، وانزل مشي. I'd walk in، فوت اوصل على عكرة. أول stop كانت بدها تكون عكرة. And for those of you who don't know what عكرة is, it's the best فول وحمص place in the world. People from Tripoli, there's a lot of people that are going to argue with me. Some will say الدنون أحسن. Some will say أنا بالنسبة لي خيي عكرة. So بتبلش بعكرة. And then I would finish my breakfast and walk all the way into the souk, the old souk. I'd go into souk الذهب, souk العطارين, just to go walk the streets that I used to walk when I was a kid. And every time I'd stop at Khan al-Sabun. And Khan al-Sabun today has become big. It's got branches everywhere. But none of them feel the same as walking to the original, because you go in and it's still ancient, it's still historic, it's still those domes and those cross vaults and those barrel vaults that are there. And they expanded so much more than just making soap. They make oils and scented oils, and every time I go into Khan al-Sabun, I get scented soap and I bring them over to my mom, because what my mom learned, I think, from Tripoli and loves to do is that she puts these scented soaps in our clothes, in the clothes drawers, in the drawers, because they just make the clothes smell better. And then after finishing from Khan al-Sabun, برجع ببلش اطلع صوب الماشية، ساحة التل. برجع بطلع عند ساحة التل، بطلع تحت الماشية، بكزر من تحت منها من، برجع بضل مكمل، بوصل لعند شوي هيك قبل عند الحلاب. also كمان نحن انا نسيت شغله، ما فينا نحكي عن طرابلس وما نحكي عن حلويات طرابلس. one of the biggest staples of Tripoli, which is the sweets that came out of there، يعني عبد الرحمن الحلاب وكل يعني الحلاوة بطرابلس. صراحة أنا ما عندي like there's no comparison. And even when I lived in Zahriya inside, there was this old small little sweet shop كان اسمه التوم. والتوم كان يعمل كعكة كنافة بتاكلوا أصابعكم من بعدها. هالقد كان قوي هذا الزلمة. I hope هلا صار لي زمان ما نزلت على التوم أنا، بس I hope مشوار الجاي بس انزل على لبنان بدي انزل لتحت وبدي اشوف اذا قسيت تحت. It would make my trip, honestly. And then after this long day in Tripoli and having all this food and everything like that, I'd get back in the car and I'd drive all the way down to Mina. I'd go for a little coastal walk and then end the night by going into the many bars. There's lots of bars and a nice night scene in El Mina. There's bars like Rust, which is run by a dear friend of mine, اسمه طارق Haushar. And then there's Timmy's as well, which is a very nice bar, and you'd have a couple of drinks. And I think those days for me in my trips to Lebanon were vital, because I just felt like I'm at home, and I felt like this is home to me, and it truly is. Not because of just living there and having spent a huge period of my life down there, but also because it's because of the lessons that I learned from living down there or living in Tripoli. And so, as we get to the end of this or today's episode, I'd like to highlight a point, which is kind of also what drove me to make this podcast today about Tripoli. Is when I grew older and started going down to Beirut, for example, or had to study down there and live there for a period, it used to upset me so much when I hear what people used to think or say about Tripoli. And I remember one time I was sitting with someone and they go like, "يي طرابلس نيا." أنا طلعت قلت لها ليه عم بتقولي نيا على طرابلس إنه أنت رايح, like, have you been? And she's like, "No, I've never been." طيب كيف, how could you say نيا على محل مش رايحة عليه قبل بحياتك أنت؟ How do you know إنه هذا الشيء حدا قال لك؟ So like if someone says that القمر لونه موف خلاص أنا بصدقه يعني. It used to upset me so much to see what people thought of this beautiful city that I loved, and I used to defend it so much, and I still do. But I think the only way to change this is by helping people see what Tripoli really is. And that's kind of also the reason why I decided to do today's episode, is to kind of tell people my perspective and my view of why Tripoli is not only a beautiful city and not only a historical city, but a very big and very vital part of Lebanon. I want to use this episode to encourage everyone to help them see the beauty in Tripoli, but also to make you want to go down and visit and enrich and rejuvenate Tripoli. You see, we've let these corrupt politicians drag us from one hell to another. But maybe it's about time that we start taking control and we start deciding our own fate. And we start fixing up the places that we call home. And rather than leave it up to them to decide which one's the better option. I think that's kind of also why I wanted to do this podcast today and talk about Tripoli. And again, بحب أول شيء ارجع أذكر ووجه تعازي لكل العالم اللي تأثرت بهول البنايات اللي وقعوا بطرابلس، لأنه بس توجع طرابلس وبيوجع لبنان كله، ما بس بتوجع طرابلس، مثل ما بس توجع بيروت وبيوجع لبنان كله، بس توجع طرابلس وبيوجع لبنان كله. And I hope for all of you who don't know what Tripoli is, hopefully this will introduce it to you. And for all of you who think differently of Tripoli, I hope today's episode helps you see the beauty of Tripoli. And I hope one day بس روح على لبنان بعمل حلقة تانية عن طرابلس بقلب طرابلس، لأنه أنا هذا الشيء اللي قهرني اليوم. اللي قهرني إنه أنا قاعد عم بحكي عن طرابلس ومش عم بمشي بشوارع طرابلس ومش موجود بقلبها لطرابلس. بس بكرة منرجع ومنعود ومنعمل حلقة بقلب طرابلس، واللي بيحب يشاركني أهلا وميت سهلة. أنا باخدكن بورجيكن طرابلس عجمالها، وأنا ما حأحكي، أنا حخلي العالم يلي بقلب طرابلس تورجيكن شو هي طرابلس. والعالم يلي بتشيل الأكل من تمها لحتى الطعميك، والعالم يلي الكرم المنو طبيعي، هذا كله موجود بقلب طرابلس. بقى لا تخلوا كم حدا عنده نية عاطلة يغير وجهة نظركم على طرابلس، لأنه طرابلس هي جزء لا يتجزأ من لبنان، وهي جزء تاريخي عظيم للبنان، وهي مركز نحن لازم نرجع نرمم ونعيده ونرده على عظمته. تذكروا it was the golden age and it was nothing compared to what we can do today. If we need to strive for change, and we need to fix our government so that places like Tripoli that deserve to be appreciated would actually get appreciated and cherished for what they are, and their people would be treated with dignity and respect, and they wouldn't end up dying because no one fixed the buildings that they used to live in and they fell on them. That's هيدي ما حلوة بحق حياة لحدا. And I hope with this that genuinely this episode today entertains everyone, kind of bolsters or changes your views or enhances your views on what Tripoli is, and makes you appreciate it for its beauty, but also for its huge part in the history of Lebanon itself. And with that, we reach the end of the episode today. And again, as with every episode, I would like to thank everyone for listening in, and everyone for supporting me during this venture. وبحب لكم شكرا وهيك.